And we are live. Look at that. Countdown to 1. I'm with my good friend, Dr. Stephen Kozar.
I didn't even graduate from college.
But we're doing a video.
Although if I was on the Sid Roth show, that would be really useful right now. Everybody's a doctor on that show.
Yeah, man.
They're all fake doctors, but you just call yourself a doctor. You get a diploma mill to send you one in the mail, send them $50 or whatever, and boom.
Ah, there you go. So I could be Dr. Dan and you could be Dr. Steve?
Yes.
Oh, that would be really, really impressive. So we're doing this video. You and I talked, what was it, yesterday? And decided to do this because of a comment that was placed on one of the videos here. And it's the one called Early Pentecostal Frauds with Barry Morton.
I had a guy commenting on my version of the same video, and we wanted to talk about the sGenerals book anyway, which is something that we're going to get into, because I am really bothered by how, well, one thing is this: people believe what the experts say, even though they're not experts, and even though their ideas are just repeated over and over again, but they're not actually tested. That's one thing that bothers me. But the second thing that bothers me is the history of Pentecostalism is totally been whitewashed. And I'm not saying that all Pentecostals are unsaved and it's all of the devil and there's nothing good about any of the people who ever were Pentecostal. But that's what people want to do. They want to say, oh, so you think we're all of the devil. Well, you think we're all blah. There is truth to history that has to be tested and studied and carefully examined, and you have to go with what is true, not with what you want it to be. And unfortunately, in the world of Pentecostalism today, and that's a huge category, so there's a million different types of Pentecostals, so I'm using a broad brush here, but in general, the history of what they're being told about their history, or I should say the version of history that they're hearing, and the actual history that took place, according to the actual documents from history, are two completely different things. And this book is probably the most powerful tool in giving a false narrative and making it sound like, well, all these great men of God were great men of God. They may have had some flaws, but they were great men of God.
Let's talk about this book for a second, because Robert Liardon actually says that God is the one who gave him the mandate to write this book.
Yep.
So if God is the one who gave him the mandate to write the book, then that means that, that book is on par with the Word of God.
Yeah, at the very least, it means that it's the highest caliber of book that could possibly be written. It has the highest level of integrity. It's the most trustworthy a book could ever be. That's if you don't want to go to that extra step and say that it's inspired and therefore infallible, you would at least be saying, well, this is a book that obviously has been carefully tested. It's been carefully researched. There's been some sort of a review process and there's none of that. It's a guy writing stuff with the most shoddy scholarship. There is no scholarship, actually. It's just a bunch of storytelling in many cases. And it's actually, not only does it not have good scholarship, it actually ignores the scholarship that's available. So it's worse than just somebody who's uninformed. It's somebody who's deliberately telling a version of history that they want to promote.
Yep. And there's when you read the book and you read the stories of the people in the book, like John Alexander Dowie and Charles Fox Parham, and then you look at the actual historical events, they really are just half truths, or they just don't line up with what actually happened.
Very much.
For example, what we're going to be talking about today, the violence that took place within the early Pentecostal movement isn't even mentioned. The Parhamites aren't even mentioned. The sect that murdered Letitia Greenhoff in 1907, that came out of John Alexander Dowie's city and Charles Parham's leadership, that's not mentioned at all. So, this
is not good history, and I think that there is there's a tendency with Christians who are weak in their faith, who they don't want to examine things like this because they're afraid it's going to destroy their entire faith. It's going to destroy Christianity itself if they find out how false some of the leaders are that they've been, basically idolizing. Yeah. And we should not be afraid of what bad information might exist about people within the church, because we don't put our faith in men anyway. And I think the Pentecostal movement in general really does see itself as this distinct movement. There's always been Christians, there's always been the church, and they admit that, and they say that's fine, that's good. They don't say that they're the only Christians who ever lived or anything like that, but they do make a very clear distinction that about 100 years ago, and now it'd be 115 years ago, there was a very distinct movement of God, unlike anything that had happened up. You have to go all the way back to the time of the New Testament to have anything like what's taken place since Azusa Street. And that is the narrative. That's the story that's being told, and it's usually told with it's a very abbreviated story. And you know what, Dan, this is something I think about a lot. When you don't look into history, you basically have to take everybody else's word for it. Even what I know of history and what you know of history, we can only know so much. And any period of history, any event or any person of history, you have an almost endless supply of information if you want to keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And most people go to, at the very most, just level 1. And that's it.
Yeah.
But there are more and more layers. And I don't think you or I would say that we're at the deepest possible level, but we're much deeper than the average Christian, because this is just something we're really passionate about. And more importantly than our understanding, it's our ability to find information from primary sources, number one, and then number two, finding other historians who are getting their information from primary sources. In other words, they're getting their research is being done from primary source information, which means you don't just read a book about something, you actually read about the actual thing itself, either from a newspaper article or from some kind of firsthand observation that took place in the actual time frame of the event.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, checking Barry Morton sources and going back, and just all I did was get a subscription to newspapers.com. That's it. And just started typing in and searching. And I came up with so much stuff. I've got over 500 clippings and most of that is from the early Pentecostal movement. And like we're going to be talking about this incident that happened in 1907.
Can't believe I forgot to have this in front of me here. Talking about primary source, this is an actual insert from the Century magazine. This is not a reprint. You can find this on Google Books, which is a really bad copy of a copy. This is the actual magazine article from the Century magazine in, I think it's 1902. John Alexander Dowie, the Prophet and His Prophets.
Yes, and I've actually read that. That's a good. You can find that online. Right, and that's where I've read. Yep.
So if you want to believe that Alexander Dowie is this great man of God who did untold miracles and he healed so many people that we can't even count the great healings, and he was such a great man of God. Yeah, he got troubled later on in life and turned into basically a money grubbing creep and womanizer. And blah, 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 blah. But that was later on. But for most of his life, he was an incredibly godly man who was the epitome of a great healer. If you want to believe that story, you have to believe that this magazine article doesn't exist, that the writer of the article who went and visited Zion, spent time with Dowie and other people in the movement and interviewed them and wrote about it. You have to pretend that none of this happened. You have to pretend that I'm not actually holding this in my hand. Or you have to say, well, these are all liars. And this is what you can't do, Christian friend. You can't say that everybody who opposes you is automatically a liar.
Right.
But that's what they do. And that's what the comments that you've gotten and I've gotten at times, it just says, well, this can't be true because it's so bad that, somebody would have said something by now. And we're like, well, that's us. We're saying something about it. And we're referring to other people who said something about it.
Like I said, I've got over 500 clippings from newspapers.com, just about all of them except for maybe 20 or 30 of them, are from the early Pentecostal movement. And when you look at the history, you go back and you look at history, this stuff was being reported. And John Alexander Dowie was a household name. I mean, if you go back from 1890 all the way up to his death from 1906 when he died, he was a household name.
He was like the Donald Trump of his day.
He was every day in the newspapers.
The newspapers loved him because he was so outrageous that whatever he did, day to day would make headlines, and people would buy the newspapers just to see what did this lunatic do today as opposed to what he did last week.
Yeah, he was making money for the newspapers, so they didn't have any problem going out and reporting him. But that's the thing. The stuff like this is all over newspapers.com, and anybody who wants to research this, it just take $8, spend it, buy a month of newspapers.com, and then cancel. And just do your own research, and you can download those clippings as a PDF file or a JPEG, and you can save them on your computer. As a matter of fact, if you would like me to do this, I can take and put my link to newspapers.com or my clippings, and you can check out all the clippings that I've got. But I'm just telling you, this stuff is all over the newspapers, and that's all I did. I read Barry Morton's papers, and I said, okay, let's check the sources. You check the sources by going over there and spending a few bucks. And you've got access to all kinds of newspaper articles. It's just crazy.
In the old days, you would have to go to the town where these events took place. You'd go to the public library, and you'd probably either go through their actual newspapers, or in many cases, they were archiving those on microfiche, as little pieces of film, and you run through this kind of projector thing. But now, because of the internet, we have access to information like never before. It's not hard.
Yeah. Now, we've got about an hour to do on this, so we probably should jump right to the
Less
comment.
Than an hour.
Do we? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I'm on my phone here, and I'm just going to read the comment on my phone. I'm not going to even give the guy's name. I'm just going to actually read the comment. It says, while I typically respect and believe Steve Kozar, it is obvious that this guy, Barry Morton, is pretty much full of crap. Ringing body parts to breaking bones and slitting throats, and then he's got 3 question marks, behind that. Show me the evidence with an exclamation point. That would have made the Christian and secular history books, and he's got history in all caps. It would have been recorded as a massacre. Now even you, speaking of you, Steve, could be giving your cause a bad name and place for ridicule. In a place for ridicule. Steve, maybe it's time you hold yourself accountable for who you align with. This guy is obviously a research embellisher. So I talked to you this afternoon, and I just read for you a little snippet of that article that I've got saved at newspapers.com. You want me to share the screen and let's go to it and look at it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So.
And while you're looking that up, I think what that comment is really saying is this. If something is really bad and it really seems hard to believe, it must not be true.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not how you come to a conclusion about whether or not something is true. If I don't want it to be true, therefore it's not true. Or if it seems too outrageous, I'm not, on one hand, surprised by his comment. On the other hand, I'm like, well, he just assumed the worst of me, and he assumed the worst of an actual historian. Barry Morton is on a university campus as a history professor.
Yep.
So to just say that he's a fraud or he's an embellisher because you don't like the information that he gives, that's very poor reasoning.
September, you see the article? September 21st, 1907. Tortured in right of fanatics, dies. This is speaking of Letitia Greenhoff. And what happened was Charles Fox Parham comes to Zion and tries to gather himself a following, and he does. He gets about 300 or so people. And the Parhamites are born. And so the guy who tortured this poor woman was a Parhamite. Now, Parham didn't commit any of the crimes. He had already left Zion by that time. But the fact of the matter is that this poor woman was tortured to death by people who were part of Parham's cult.
And the reason they were part of Parham's cult was because they had previously been part of Dowie's cult.
Yep.
And Dowie was now gone, and different people were stepping in and trying to take over to have the followers become their followers.
Yep. Look at, can you see the legs twisted victim in agony section there? I'm just going to read that one section, and then you tell me if what did he say here? If wringing body parts and breaking bones and slitting throats isn't possible. When he's talking about slitting throats, that's the section of the interview where Barry was talking about this particular incident, the killings of the Parhamites. So that slitting of the throat was a different person. That was Frank Crow, a young teenage boy. And that happened. And we're not going to look at that. You can go to my video, The Parhamite Killings, and you can see that for yourself. But this is what it says. Speaking of Letitia Greenhoff, the victim, all she was told was that the ceremony, in quotation marks, was about to begin. After a loud prayer by Mitchell, that's the guy who is who's in charge of this whole thing. After a loud prayer by Mitchell, his wife took hold of one of the old woman's legs, gripped it tight, and by twisting, pulling, and pressing down upon the knee, forced it nearly straight. Now, this woman was paralyzed. She was bedridden. The screams of agony rang through the house, but the same cruel treatment was given the other limb. And as both showed signs of returning to their former positions, the son seated himself on the knees to hold them straight. As he did so, he heard a breaking sound made by fractures of the bones. What was that? He demanded, shaking Mitchell by the arm. This is what Mitchell said. This is craziness. It's only corruption coming out with the devils, was the answer. Don't hurt her, he pleaded the son, and Mitchell pushed him away, saying, those are not her cries. They are the cries of the demons. And he put his hand over her mouth, stifling her screams. I'm not going to read any more. It's too gruesome. I'll put the link to this article, by the way, in the YouTube description.
You know, Dan, we also have that messed up church, that large compilation article about the early Pentecostal frauds. We'll put that link too.
Absolutely.
Which has a number of different articles all compiled.
But when you go to the continued page over here, what ends up happening is this guy, Harold Mitchell, who's in charge of this whole thing, he literally takes a pillow and puts it over her face.
I remember that.
And then she stops screaming, and he lets the son and daughter who know that he tells them that she's just sleeping, and he actually murdered her. It's just gruesome. This stuff is gruesome, and they're doing this because, and I forgot to mention this, they believe what Dowie taught, that sickness and disease were a result of demon possession.
Right.
And so they're trying to cast out the demon that has been keeping this woman bedridden for 15 years. And it's just a horrible, horrible situation.
And if you don't like it, too bad. But Parham is the founder of the Pentecostal movement. He is. Yeah, Pentecostals say that. I went to the Flowers Museum, the Assemblies of God Museum, and he's on the wall listed as the founder of the Pentecostal movement.
Yeah.
So the Pentecostals say this. We're not saying it. And Parham was not a good man.
He was not. No, he was not. As a matter of fact, that article mentions his arrest for sodomy. So with that young boy.
And that whole issue of that arrest is one that was never completely clarified in history, because some people say it was just he was being framed, and other people say no, he really was guilty. And based on all the documentation, we don't have the definitive answer. All we know is that he was arrested.
We do
for
not.
sodomy.
We do not have, yes, that's what he was arrested for. And, there was this tension between him and Wilbur Verleva, who was who took over from Dowie. And there was a fight between the two of them. So some say that Verleva is the one that set him up. Who knows? Right. We just don't have the evidence for that.
As long as we're talking about real historical things that were recorded in the papers or the magazines of the day, the story in this article about Dowie's daughter dying of burns.
Mm-hmm.
I know you mentioned it in the video, but I'm just so absolutely disgusted by this man and by the fact that today people like Benny Hinn and many others describe Dowie as one of the people that should be emulated, and we should look to him as an example. His daughter was curling her hair, was it?
Yes. She was using a... Go ahead.
This is before they had electric hair curlers, so she was using one that was heated up by alcohol being burned.
Yeah,
and he had a
Dowie,
rule.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
A rule that said no alcohol in this town of Zion, even if it's the alcohol that you use to burn in a lamp, or in her case, this hair curling iron. And so it caught fire. She had horrendous burns all over. She was in agony. He didn't heal her.
He did not, and he wouldn't call a doctor. They begged him to call a doctor. He would not call a doctor.
So not only did he not heal her, even though he's supposed to be this great, amazing healer, he mustered up the mercy to forgive her as she lay in agony, dying from her burns. Because
he begged for his forgiveness.
Yes, she had to beg for his forgiveness. He was such a horrible, manipulative cult leader, the absolute worst kind of abusive cult leader we can imagine. And his own daughter's dying, and he thinks he's doing this great thing by saying, well, you disobeyed my rules against alcohol. But you know what? I'm so great, I'm going to forgive you before you die as you lay in your bed with burns all over. Yeah, and she died.
She did.
He didn't even seem to show much remorse about it. It was disgusting.
He was really he was
a creep.
Really a bad dude, man. He was a
horrible human being.
He was, and it's funny that here's a guy who claimed to be able to heal, or claimed he had healed thousands and thousands of people, and yet his own daughter lay there suffering in agony, and he couldn't do anything about it. And the papers took advantage of that. They reported that. That was also made the national headlines, too, because as we were talking about in the beginning, this guy was in the newspapers weekly.
All the time.
Yeah.
So let's talk about why God's Generals as a book can't really be taken seriously at all. The very first chapter is about John Alexander Dowie.
And this
is what a good book should do. It should have footnotes, and it gives you references at the end telling you where they got their information. And Roberts Liardon, is it Liardon or
Liardon? I used to call him Liardon, and I used to think, man, good night. Why in the world? Yeah. And then I found out later that I was pronouncing it wrong, and it was Liardon.
So all of the quotes are from Gordon Lindsay's book, John Alexander Dowie.
Hold on a second. Unless his name really is Liardon, and like that British comedy show where Mrs. Bucket is really named Miss Bouquet. She calls herself Bouquet, but it's spelled Bucket. I mean,
I do not know.
It could be that. All right. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there.
So a bad historian who's trying to make their particular version of history seem like the only version of history will only use the sources that back up their version. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what you see in this book. He doesn't find anybody outside of his own circle of people. And so he quotes...
Okay?
Yeah,
that's it.
That looks good. So Gordon Lindsay is the guy who was the one of the biggest promoters of the whole charismatic movement. In fact, I have this idea for a video, Dan, that I haven't gotten to yet, but it's to show the direct connection between Alexander Dowie, Gordon Lindsay, and Todd White.
Here's what's interesting about... Go ahead.
Same stream of people. The Gordon Lindsay's organization is still in existence today, and it's got people like Todd White as guest speakers, and they promote people like Todd White. It's the same group over a period of 120 years.
Here's what's interesting about Gordon Lindsay. Gordon Lindsay was actually born in Zion City.
Right.
That is the city, in case folks don't know, that's the city that John Alexander Dowie built that is still in existence today, by the way. He built that as a commune, and he had all of his followers move to that city, had a bank there, had a bunch of factories there. It was just an entire city.
It was the ultimate pyramid scheme. He owned everything.
Yeah, he did. He actually did. And so anyway, Gordon Lindsay was born there. And when Dowie fell, Lindsay's parents moved to another commune. And they were there for a very short period of time, another faith healers commune. They were there for a very short period of time, but then they ended up moving to what is the? It's on the top of my. What state is that? John G. Lake, where John G. Lake lived. It's slipped my mind.
Washington, Seattle, Washington, or Tacoma, or
yeah, it was. He moved from. It was when he moved from Oregon, Portland.
Okay.
So he moved to he was in Washington, and he had healing homes there, and then he went to Portland. So Lindsay's parents moved to Portland. Lindsay ends up going to Lake's church, where Parham is preaching, and claims to have been converted under Parham's preaching. And Lindsay tried his hand at being a faith healer, and that didn't go very well for him. As a matter of fact, John G. Lake took him with him on some of his crusades and actually gave him a tent. And it didn't work out for him too well. He was a better organizer and a better planner than he was a faith healer. And guess who he took under his wing? Of course, we all know it was what? William Branham?
William Branham.
Yep.
Probably the creepiest, darkest faith healer, quote unquote, of the 20th century.
Yeah.
William Branham was another version of Alexander Dowie.
Yeah. But anyway, you're talking about his sources.
Here's another example. The chapter about Aimee Semple McPherson. He uses one book for all of his references. One book and one book only. And the book that he's using is not a good book. It's actually Mark Epstein Daniel. Is it Mark? He's got too many first names.
Yeah, there you go.
I looked up the writer of that book, and he's not a theological writer. He's not a historical writer. He's a writer that kind of does Reader's Digest style books. Yeah, like just popular books about popular topics. He's not a serious scholar at all. And that's the book that, a popular book would be one that's basically like it's like a magazine in book form, where it's just to kind of keep you entertained while you're sitting in a doctor's office. It's not serious. It's not necessarily scholarly or even true, but it just kind of is there to fill space. Now, the thing that really, really bothered me about that is that if this guy, Roberts Liardon, if he was serious about getting the best possible scholarly information about Aimee Semple McPherson, he would have used this book, which was published, and he could have used it. And Edith Blomhofer is a very, very well-respected.
Yeah.
Yes. She's a serious scholar.
Yes,
she actually took years, not weeks, not months. She took years to write this very scholarly biography, which has got the good and the bad. It's not an anti-Aimee Semple McPherson. It's not a pro. It's just a book that tries to accurately portray her. He didn't refer to this book once. Why? Because he doesn't care about scholarship.
Yeah.
He doesn't care one bit. By the way, this is the other book that I have from Blumhofer. It's about the history of the AOG.
Really, I've got that,
really
but
interesting.
I've got an electronic version. I see, like you, I've got a few books in the background here, but I more than anything, I read the electronic versions because of it's just easier for me to read on my eyes.
I fill up my basement. You can't see all my books, but they're scattered all over the place back here.
Hey, let me read you something from the preface of the book really quick of God's Generals. Okay.
Yeah.
So the preface was written by Carol Liardon, his mom.
Don't ever have your mom write the preface to your book. That just
so this is what it says.
He's a good boy. He always ate his vegetables. I only had to spank him twice.
Second, when Roberts was 12 years old, the Lord appeared to him and instructed him to study the lives of great men and women of God. The Lord told Roberts that this intensive study would be an important part of his training for the ministry. So God told Roberts to do some really serious work here and visited him personally. And so you were showing the end of the chapters here, and who's he using? He's using one source or maybe two sources, but Yeah. So not a very good scholar at all.
And, you know, it's interesting. Bill Johnson doesn't have it on his website anymore. It's just kind of a half of a finished project. But he was supposed to be getting all of the materials from this guy, who apparently has got this great collection of artifacts from all the great healers in the past. And Bill Johnson was going to put it all online on the Bethel website, a special section
about that.
And then it's not there anymore. What they even had to begin with is no longer there. But he's basically supposed to be the guy that's going to carry on the tradition. And it's a tradition of frauds.
Yeah, it is.
It's not a tradition of godly men. There are godly people within the Pentecostal movement. There are people who were sincere, for sure. We're not saying that they're all frauds, but the founders, in many cases, were either complete frauds or they were guilty of a lot of fraudulent behavior as well as possibly some genuine behavior.
Yeah.
A guy like Gordon Lindsay, he seems to be kind of hard to figure out because he was just such a big promoter of all these other people. He wasn't really promoting himself so much, but why would he promote guys like, William Branham? I don't get it.
Well, I mean, he was sucked up in that stuff, Yeah. I mean, he was just part of that movement, and who knows what his actual motives were. But I'll tell you what, I mean, Branham was I've listened to, I remember I told you 6, 7, 8 months ago, I downloaded a bunch of Branham sermons and was listening to him, and I said, good night, I'm starting to talk like him, because I listened to him so much. But he was just a fraud. And who was there's a site that you can go to, and you bought the book.
Yeah, I'm going to grab a couple books.
Yeah, grab them.
I've got a couple of them right here, but it's John Collins. Oh, that's not one of them. John Collins actually grew up in the Branham cult.
Yeah.
And his father was one of the leaders that took over after Branham died mysteriously or surprisingly in a car accident in 1965. And Collins, was it Collins? Yeah, John Collins. I think it's John Andrew Collins. Mm-hmm. He has about a half a dozen books. And the thing that really, really amazes me, and I would love to, I only emailed with him once or twice, and I said I'd really like to interview him because he's doing basically a lifetime of research into William Branham by going to the town in southern Indiana, which I visited. I visited Branham's church and grave and took pictures and stuff. But in that town, there's all sorts of information at the local library that's not available anywhere. And this guy, John Collins, he's like, I'm going to find out the real story of what Branham taught or what he did. And did he tell the truth? Or are his stories something that can be corroborated by actual historical documentation? And what he's found is that William Branham was incredibly fraudulent. He was a pathological liar. He said things that in his own tapes, if you just compare one tape to another, he's contradicting himself in just crazy ways. And even some of the historians who have been kind of like the reference historians. I have one over here, Harrell. All Things Are Possible. It's one of the historical books. I think he was from the University of Indiana, but I could be wrong. But they all kind of generalize about who Branham was. They say he was a quiet man. He seemed humble. He didn't have the best theology, but people believed he had genuine healings. And then you listen to the guy, and he was a wild, crazy cult leader heretic who was also a pathological liar. All you got to do is listen to him and do the actual research. And that's where I'm really passionate about guys like this, who, because he was part of this cult, he wanted to find out for himself what really happened. What was my real family history? Should I still be a part of this church? Was it sincere? And so they listened to the tapes from the actual leader of the movement, and they found all these contradictions. So we'll put links to this.
Let's.
There's a couple of really
website too.
There's this guy John Andrew Collins has a great website. I think it's just william/branham.org or something. He has tons of research there. He had a whole playlist of great little like half-hour documentaries, and they all were taken down.
Yeah, he's got them on his website, though. You can watch them. I've watched all of them, and there's, I don't know, what are there, 50 of them or something like that? And they're about 10 minutes. They're about 10, 12 minutes a piece, but it's worth watching them again. I may have to go through them again. He also has a podcast, and I'll try to get that podcast as well. But I'm looking at the contents of Leardon's book, and the chapter on William Branham is chapter 10, A Man of Notable Signs and Wonders. The guy was one of the biggest frauds. He was a racist. He was part of, or he not part of, but he promoted members of the KKK, and I've got a video on that as well on my YouTube channel. William Branham was just a huge heretic,
and most of his references about William Branham come from Gordon Lindsay's book. Gordon Lindsay was the #1 promoter of William Branham. So that's like, I want to know if pro wrestling is real or not. So I'm going to go to the guy who promotes pro wrestling and get his, objective opinion.
But remember, I think it's noteworthy to keep in mind that it was a visitation from the Lord that told him to look into the lives of these men and women, and so if that's the case, you're right. He's not doing a good job of that at all. We know it's not the case, but you know what I'm saying.
It's also worth mentioning that Robert Liardon is also guilty of some really atrocious sins. In his, I don't know, late 20s. Was it in his 20s? I
can't recall. It was several years ago. That's all I remember.
It was like maybe 10, 15 years ago, actually, if I remember right. But gay, homosexual affair type information having to do with youth leaders and youth group members or something. I don't remember the story, but if you just typed it in, he's not a dependable scholar. He's not a dependable man of God that can be trusted based on his own personal behavior and by his really terrible scholarship.
Not at all. And he also has, he's written a book that he talking about his trip to heaven. And you can go on YouTube and you can watch some of that. I think it's an hour or so long. He's talking to a church, and he's talking about how as a little boy he was taken to heaven, and he was actually was able to go swimming with Jesus and just all kinds of crazy stuff.
That's how you know. If you don't have good scholarship and you're not doing good historical research, just go to heaven, swim with Jesus, and then you can just say whatever you want. It must be true.
Everybody has houses there, and they kind of look like earthly houses, and the people that are living there in heaven have pictures of their loved ones that are still alive on their walls. And, the couches there are so comfortable that they engulf you. They just wrap around you. I mean, I'm not making this up. This is what he said in the video.
He got that from Pee Wee Herman, isn't it? There was a cherry. A chair. That's right. That's the theology of Pee Wee Herman.
Oh,
Pee Wee's Playhouse.
Oh man.
And what's really reprehensible is this terrible, shoddy, poorly researched book, which is actually just propaganda. This is what they use at many, many schools today, like the Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry.
The Bethel School of Ministry uses that, don't they? As a textbook. Yep. A textbook! Here we go. We're going to open up our textbook now, God's Generals, and we're going to look now at William Branham and what a great man of God he was.
It must be true because it's in our textbook, boys and girls.
It's in our textbook, and it's written by a guy who went to heaven. Anyway.
And we are outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1 on this sort of thing. I know. This video, I love and appreciate every single person who likes what we're doing and appreciates what we're doing, but I just wish we were able to get it to a larger audience. So if you're watching this, thank you for watching.
Yeah.
I hope you see that we really are sincere. We're not trying to slander people for no reason. We're trying to get the truth out about, what's harmful. I mean, people are being really, really hurt. In the case of some people, they were killed by cult leaders. By dangerous cult leaders. And we should not be, washing over these things and pretending they didn't happen because we're afraid something bad will come from them. No, something bad comes when you cover up this stuff. That's what we want to stop.
Exactly.
We want to stop the covering up. Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. I think this is a really good,
I hope so.
Discussion.
Yeah, and please, everybody who's watching this, don't necessarily trust us just because we sound like we're sincere. Look at the materials that we're going to post. Do your own research. This is not that hard. We are just lay people. Dan and I are not professors. We're not scholars in our own right, but we're doing some of the things that anybody can do to find out for themselves whether something is really true or not.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. This was a good talk, and let's do it again.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Dan.
Let's do it again. All right. Talk to you later.